How are you doing today?
Hey, Caitlin, I'm doing good. How you? How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much.
All right, cool. Well, I was just perusing through your website. Um, so it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So, how'd you get into the ADHD coaching lifestyle or coaching
Yeah,
profession?
yeah, no, that's a great question. Okay, I'll try to make this short, but I'm pretty long-winded, so please don't hesitate to interrupt me. But I got into coaching because I knew that I wanted to do something service-oriented. I always knew that that was going to be I was going to end up there somehow. I just didn't know what that would look like.
Yeah.
I did have a few friends that were like business coaches, and like
Mhm.
executive coaches, so I knew of coaching as a concept. But
Okay.
it wasn't until I sought out an ADHD coach for myself, and I can't exactly remember how I learned that ADHD coaches existed. And then when I started working with her and I saw the difference that it made for me, that's when I realized like I think that this is it. And so then I went and pursued a coaching certification with the IAC Center, which is ADHD coaching specific. And
Okay.
then I started doing ADHD life coaching, but that's kind of how I got into it.
Oh, nice. Well, that's actually pretty cool. Um, I know we talked a little bit, right, about kind of like the topics we wanted to cover today. But
Yeah.
before we jump into that, first, want to welcome everybody to the Sales Manager Academy podcast. I'm sorry. As always, I'm your host, Omar, and we talk about retail leadership, typically in more of a boutique setting. And today we have our guest, Caitlin, who, as you may have heard, is an ADHD coach. And she works with professionals, right? As she mentioned a little bit about how she got into it. Um, Actually, before we start, Caitlin, want to open it up for you to kind of explain a little bit more what you do as a profession, because you mentioned how you got into it, right? But what do you typically see? What do you typically, I guess, deal with when it comes to your clients?
Yeah, let me know if I'm correctly understanding this. But so basically, I exclusively work with adults, generally adults who are professionals, but I do work with like some college students,
Okay.
just a handful. But for the most part, all the people that I work with are like employed and like are working generally in corporate settings. And I help them create systems and structures so that they can learn to work with their brain versus against their brain and try to figure out how to manage ADHD in a world that's really built for neurotypicals.
Definitely understand where that can come in. Uh, I know my time in the field, I used to be a DM, a director,
Yeah.
uh, and I will say, on my experience, my wife tells me all this all the time. She says I've been ADHD without realizing. I got diagnosed by a psychologist not too long ago, right, in one of our
Yeah.
sessions because we were just talking about it, and it goes through a lot with like my experience because I've always hated being what I call a desk jockey, right? I've always loved interacting with individuals, having my teams going out, meeting with customers, clients, but having more of a setting that's not a constant, this is my four walls, cubicle or office type of situation, right? Um, and I found that uh, it's something that's very typical among quite a few people that are neurodivergent, because it's the stimulus, I guess, right? Of not having the same routine over and over again, because sometimes we can get into like fatigueness of having to do the same thing and not having anything essentially exciting happen in our life, right? For lack of a better
Yeah.
word.
Yeah. Nothing novel. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I know one of the topics we really want to touch today, because this is from my personal experience, and I'm sure you've seen it as well from yours and from your clients, is productivity, right? Because that the fatigueness that we see that we deal with on a daily basis does cause a lot of issues in our day-to-day progress, right? Because we know we can get things done like nothing, but then some things just lag on and take forever because we get distracted by, the squirrel in the window sometimes. Um, Now, in I guess Caitlin, in your experience, right? Um, do you see that it's not a lack of drive for your people? I know you mentioned kind of helping build systems, right? Um,
Yeah.
is it building a system because people feel fatigued or they feel like they have lack of not drive so much, but I think more like purpose?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to touch on this in particular because like I think that a lot of folks, especially folks that were diagnosed late, who's a lot of my client population,
Mhm.
they kind of grew up being told or thinking of themselves as lazy. And it's not for like lack of drive, like you said, like there's plenty of desire to like want to do the thing. It's just that sometimes making yourself do the thing it feels impossible because there's just like just like you said, like we're constantly searching for stimulus. Like your brain is just like seeking that dopamine and it's just like trying to find it. One thing that this is kind of bringing up for me is this idea of being able to kind of create motivation. What I mean by this is like, so this is from Dr. William Dodson, who is a psychiatrist that specializes in ADHD. And he has this acronym that we learned in my coaching cohort, which was NICE. So it's novelty, interest, challenge, and extreme urgency. And please, if this is too long, like don't hesitate to jump in.
No.
But basically, novelty is kind of what you were talking about earlier. Just like when things are new and interesting, and how you didn't like being
Mhm.
a desk jockey, which is hilarious, and you liked being out in the field and being able to interact with people and having like different days. Like that's kind of where that like novelty comes in, and then interest, and that one's pretty straightforward too. It's like when and this is for neurotypicals as well. Like when you find
Yeah.
something interesting, it's so much easier to get engaged. However, for ADHD brains, it can feel almost impossible to get into a project when there's a lack of interest. And then there's also challenge, which your mileage may vary. Depending on who you are, challenge can either be really effective or not as effective. But the key
Yeah.
is to find the right amount of challenge. So if it's too challenging, it'll be demotivating. And if it's not challenging enough, it'll be boring. And then extreme urgency is also pretty straightforward. That's kind of like the classic ADHD procrastinator mode where you kind of wait till the last minute and then all of a sudden you're able to get this giant project done in just a couple of hours right before it's due. So that's also a big motivator for the ADHD brain. And so there are different ways that you can add novelty, interest, challenge, and extreme urgency into different tasks. So we can I don't know get into that, or if you does that sound good?
Yeah, no, I mean that's actually like a great concept. I know because it kind of goes in hand too with another thing I wanted to talk about, which is having a system that's so rigid that we just
Mhm.
fail at it. We've set up the day, we this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're gonna follow, and then just one thing goes wrong and we just throw the entire plan out the window,
Yeah.
right? I know in my days, one of the biggest things I've taught my people, right? Not just me to learn, but also my sales managers, my sales teams, people I've worked with, was learning how to create more of a framework that's more fluid and dynamic and changes. Because you are going to have things that happen throughout the day, whether you're in sales in the field or whether you're working at a project on our operations team at home office. There's always something that's going to happen that's going to pull you away, and it can either ruin the day or you can learn to essentially work around it and still be able to finish what you have or what you were doing. Um, and kind of like a sidebar, I don't know if you've read this book before, but Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Um, it's a, so this is a book I've always recommended. It's a very technical book, so it's honestly a very boring read for a lot of people. Uh, and I'm not going to even try pronouncing the author's last name. His first name's, or their first name is Mihaly. Um, you'll see it, you'll know it. It's a great book, and pretty much in a nutshell, what it talks about is how to be able to get into the state of flow, where kind of what you're talking about allows you to get into that point of interest where like nothing else matters. But for a lot of people, they don't realize whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And it affects, I think, neurodivergence a little bit more. But on average, it takes about 15 minutes of consistent work on a project or task for you to get lost into it and lose track of time. And there are certain things that you can do to kind of help you get into that flow, which is like listening to music or getting in harmony or in symphony with something. But the moment something interrupts you, it takes you out of that state of flow and it takes a minimum of 15 minutes to get back in. So having like a framework or something kind of like what you were mentioning with Nice to understand what's happening and what you can do, I think gets people more on track and helps you to actually understand where some of your pitfalls might be and some of the challenges that you're going to have while working on something is going to it's going to arise, right? It's always plan for contingencies, right? Have that set up because you can have a plan, but the moment you get punched in the face, the plan goes out the window.
100%. Yeah.
So kind of back to what you were mentioning, right? Go ahead, take the ball. I'll let
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what that I guess was coming up for me in terms of like how to add that like motivation and how to get like kind of like into that flow and like lost in the mix. Love that you shared that like learning from that book Flow about it takes a while to get into that state of flow or that state of like hyper focus. And so some ways to do that are with novelty. So some ideas for novelty. So what comes to mind first, I think, is that classic example of, and this isn't for everyone, but like having for some people, like when they start an exercise habit, it makes a huge difference if they go buy themselves the clothes and can take on that identity of like, I'm a person who exercises, like these are my new clothes. For some people, like getting new school supplies or getting a new planner, I mean, I know that's like a classic, like this planner is going to change my life, and that's not what I'm like advocating for, but sometimes like having a new notebook to take notes in can make a task really interesting for you. And it's not just about like acquiring new stuff. Like you can go to a new location that's novel, maybe try a new beverage, like create and have a new snack for yourself. Maybe try sitting on the floor in your own house, like just make something a
Mhm.
little like interesting and different and new. And then that brings us
Yeah.
to interest. So just like you said, like music can help you bring yourself into that state of flow, like finding things you like and adding them to the mix of the things that you don't like. And then challenge some ways to do that, continuing with the music theme, is like maybe you race a song, maybe you race a playlist, maybe you race your laptop and you go somewhere without the charger and a fully charged laptop and you try to get those taxes that you've been putting off done by just like going for it until the computer dies and you have to go home. But
Yeah.
you know, for some people, like that setting a timer and just doing something for 5 minutes, like can be a way to build that inertia. And then with urgency, of course, like sometimes people are able to set kind of like arbitrary deadlines, but for most of us, we need external accountability for those deadlines. So, like,
Yep.
if you can like incorporate a friend into that, or even working with like your manager to like kind of like change up deadlines for yourself so that they work for you, can be some ways to like add in some of that urgency into a task. But that's kind of what was coming up for me in terms of like ways to like potentially get into that state of flow.
Yeah, because I think the deadline portion is a big one when you don't feel like an urgency that it actually has to get done, right?
Yeah.
Then it's not priority. It's not top of mind. It's not. We're not going to focus on it, right? Like if it gets done, it gets done. If it doesn't, out of mind, out of sight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that kind of goes to like a because I know I felt this before, right? Where you feel like you have to make so many decisions that you get just fatigued at the concept of having to do it. And before you even start, your willpower's been zapped. You're just out of energy, and it just becomes very difficult to kind of want to motivate yourself to do things. And I know there's a concept, and I've used this myself, that motivation isn't what happens before a task. Motivation comes after you start the process, right? I don't know if you've kind of heard that in the past or not.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, you need some oh, sorry, did I interrupt you?
oh, no, no, go ahead.
Yeah, what comes up for me with that is like, so for neurotypicals and some neurodivergent folks too, like this idea of like eating the frog, like tackling the biggest task first can be really effective. But for a lot of people with ADHD, you kind of need to build that momentum. Because like speaking of
Mhm.
like overwhelm and getting frozen, so sometimes doing the either the easiest item on the to-do list or the quickest item on the to-do list can really help you kind of build that momentum to make your way into those bigger, larger tasks. And then, of course, the classic, like if the task is too big, like just breaking things down and
Yeah.
just like making, just chunking it into like step by steps or like that, like, okay, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes. Like, first, I'm going to figure out the plan and then I'm going to execute the plan.
No, that's very true, and it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, right? Because I guess when it comes to time blocking, I know I've done that in the past. I actually have a kitchen timer I use too, right?
Yeah.
To help out. And it took me a while to kind of get used to it, where at first it was like, awesome, great. I was on top of it, but then it's like novelty kind of waned. So it started being more like it's just another thing on my list, and I'm not going to get anything done because I'm just doing it to do it, right? Uh, Understanding, I guess, the how you use your time and how your energy also is used up by certain tasks, whether it's taking the time to remember, okay, I gotta set the timer before I even start. Sometimes that makes me just like, okay, it's just another thing that I'm doing, right? Uh, and it can feel almost, I guess, overwhelming at times when you set up so much to try to keep yourself on tasks. Do you see yourself kind of helping people remove certain things where they just throw on way too much and it's like, no, no, you don't need that much to kind of help you? Because you kind of mentioned a couple of things, right? Like sitting on the floor instead of sitting at your desk, stuff like that. Um, what are, I guess, the most common things that you see with some of the people that you work with that they didn't realize, like, oh, it was something as simple as this that I was just overthinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a big theme that I notice with the over complicating or overthinking things is setting goals that are just really big. And so I'm a really big fan of Tiny Habits by BJ
Yeah.
Fogg. And yeah, of course. And he really advocates for in his research that he did at Stanford for like creating really tiny habits and just like and kind of like that classic James Clear example of like build
Mhm.
the habit of going to the gym and then the working out at the gym is something that you can like add on to that once the habit excuse me is
Yeah.
established. And so with a lot of my clients it's like, oh, I have this big lofty dream and we're like, okay, let's like that's great and amazing and we will get there. um but in order to make this progress sustainable so that this like motivation doesn't wear off when the novelty of this wears off, like how can we create this in such a way that it's sustainable? So it's really just the breaking things down that I've noticed with a lot of clients and that they're realizing like, oh, my habit, I'm building the habit of showing up. And then another thing too, I think that's really helpful is this idea of celebration again from tiny habits is like
Yeah.
when you remember to do the thing and you actually do the thing, like celebrating yourself, different from a reward, just like celebrating in the moment, doing something that feels authentic to you and genuine and doesn't make you feel dorky or goofy, whether that's like a yay or like let's go or like imagining one of my clients is an actor, and so they imagine like applause when they do things. For example, just like finding different ways to like find that shine.
Yeah, big time. I actually like that. And yeah, tiny habits is a big thing. I remember when I found out about it, I actually signed up for his email list to kind of go
Oh
through it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was actually introduced to him through a different book. I don't know if you read The Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg,
Yeah.
right? I think those are must reads, right? For anybody that's wanting to kind of understand how they can change certain things. Because it really is small things that you do on a daily basis that really compound over time. I know with like a lot of things that I teach when it comes to sales leadership and developing people, that's always been my biggest thing where I've created programs that focus on the small little things that people did on a daily basis that was repeatable and easy, that gave them that almost instant gratification, right, of being able to accomplish something. So that's like it really is a big motivator when you I guess give yourself that applause, right? That all right, I finally got something done. Whether it's small, it's taken care of. It's already done, right? And I can see like the whole concept too with eating the frog, because I remember being younger in my younger days and going through and working with like a different sales organ or in a different sales organization. They're like, yeah, just do the hardest thing first. It's like, okay. But then you kind of like get this once again, your energy is apt because you did it. And it's like, okay, now I need to recover. And now it's the next day.
Yeah.
I got to start that process over. So, and I think a lot of people kind of forget that like motivation, right? Kind of going back to it, it's not a resource, it's the result of something.
Yes.
Because when you do something and you see the results, that motivates you to want to continue it. As opposed to let me motivate myself, let me motivate, and then results will come. I know from like a sales leadership, right? Because I work with essentially district managers, regional directors on helping them develop training programs or rework their existing training to help better train their salespeople. And that's one of the biggest things that you see a lot of, especially new leaders, because a lot of these companies are smaller. They're like more mom and pop shops. They have under 100 footprint, right? So under like 100 stores typically. They don't really have the resources in-house, or they don't realize how beneficial it would be to allocate resources for training and developing in like for instance a coaching aspect on getting their people trained up on small little things like focusing on a 90-day like new hire training program, right? Or how to focus on doing small little 15-minute coaching sessions to really change habits over time instead of trying to motivate their people and doing a bunch of rah, 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 expecting a result to come from motivation instead of results occurring and then the team motivating themselves to continue the results, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure you see that too with like a lot of your people, as you mentioned, right? A lot of your clients, they kind of go through it and then they create that tiny habit where they have that habit loop, right? They have the trigger, the action, and then the result, which is typically some type of gratification to continue to want to keep it going. And then small little thing happens up here that changes and rewrites your brain so that instead of doing an old habit, you now have a new habit develop in its place,
Mhm.
right? Um, so that's kind of like I think a very, in my experience, right, very difficult thing for a lot of organizations because they don't understand that aspect of it at the beginning because they've grown from a small organization where they're so used to either the owners or the founders of the organization being so used to being hands-on with their people that once that separation starts to occur, they don't truly realize what's going on. So before where they were doing certain actions and they expect their people to continue it, but they don't
Mhm.
have a system in place, it makes it difficult. And then there's lost connectivity or a connection that's lost in between, resulting in like, for instance, in my experience, higher employee attrition, um, lower productivity. And I'm sure in your experience, right, working with professionals, that kind of equates to maybe lost time that they could have been working on a different project, or maybe they have like a pet project that they wanted to bring up within the organization. And now they just lose track of that ability to do that because they're so overwhelmed with other aspects of trying to get back on track, or feeling overwhelmed or fatigued. uh, I know we talked a little bit about kind of like some of the stuff that has worked in the past. Are there any like I don't want to say hacks, but any other productivity tips that you have to kind of help people get back in the right frame of mind? Um,
Mindset. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Well, what comes to mind when you say mindset is this idea of like, I want to versus I should. And so there's, like shoulds are pretty demotivating. They're kind of coming from a place of like, oh, well, you are failing at something. It's why you're not doing this. And so using an I want to framework can kind of help with that. But I think the key to the I want to framework is knowing the why behind doing something. So I want to do X because of Y. So instead of like I should stop playing video games and go to bed, I want to go to bed within the next 10 minutes because I want to wake up tomorrow feeling refreshed. And therefore, I'm going to play video games for 10 more minutes and then I'm going to go to bed.
yeah.
And so kind of like reframing that in your head, I think can be a really helpful way. But really the key is like, what's your why? Why are you doing this? Because a lot of ADHDers, and I'm sure neurotypicals too, like if you don't know the purpose behind something, it's going to be harder to get yourself to do the thing.
Yeah, I know from experience because typically, I will say this, a lot of salespeople tend to be neurodivergent,
Mm.
because it's gratifying to not have to do the same thing over and over again, even though a lot of like the client and customer interactions we have are very similar, but there's
Mhm.
nuances in between them that kind of make it a little bit more novel, right? But for sure, that's always been something that a lot of managers I've dealt with have issues with because they don't understand how to explain the why. They just want to be, you know, they grew up as like, I'm the seller and they got put into a manager role and they didn't develop any of the actual leadership traits that they need for that role. So it's like, do what I say, not as I do type of situation. It's like, no, no, no. I need to understand why
Yeah.
before I can actually move forward. And just taking a little bit of time to explain that can go a long way, right? Uh, and it's once they understand it, it's so gratifying to see because then they understand what they're doing as a leader, which is developing other people and spending time coaching and training and developing, right? Uh, I know for you, like, because I was thinking, right, as you were talking, I can see where a lot of individuals that kind of find themselves struggling can get the benefit of what you're offering, right? Because you're kind of holding them accountable to what they're saying they want to do and helping them maintain and create that system in place, right? What is like a typical, I guess, client interaction, or from like start to, the end of when you're working with a client? Because obviously there are times where, your relationship ends because they've achieved what they wanted to do or they have it in place. But what does that kind of look like in your journey with your clients?
Yeah, so I generally recommend at least a 3 month coaching container because that's generally how long it takes to see results.
Hmm.
But in the beginning, we'll set goals for the duration of the time we'll be coaching together. And then we'll kind of like figure out our like agreement for working with each other. By that I mean like what kind of I'll learn like what kind of things motivate them and I'll learn to like adapt to their specific style and how they like being coached.
Yeah.
And then in each session, we're going to start off like figuring out like that session's goals and what they want to like accomplish from that. And then they're always going to leave with an action item. And then at the end of that coaching container, we'll look back and we'll reflect on what was learned and what they want to do moving forward and how they can accomplish that moving forward.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, that's huge. And I agree. It takes time. I don't know who came up with like the 21 days to create a habit. That's
Yeah.
straight bull.
Yeah. Agreed.
It really is. Don't get me wrong. Like there's some habits you can create in a very shorter, like a very short span of time. But for the majority of people, it typically does take a longer time for it to truly become a habit without you needing to really think about it. And it's just like one of those where you don't really understand until you start going through something that, okay, maybe I do need a coach. And there's nothing wrong for anybody out
Hmm.
there, right? Because as mentioned earlier, if you need to talk to somebody. There are psychologists out there. They're there to lend an ear to you, right?
Hmm.
There's coaches out there that are there to help assist you, kind of like I'm sorry, Caitlin had
Yeah.
a brain fart. Kind of like Caitlin, right? Where you don't necessarily see what's missing, or you know what's missing, but you don't know what actions or what kind of systems are really there to help assist you, right? Or you've tried
Hmm.
it, but you didn't really try it,
Hmm.
right? And that's kind of like almost self-defeating when you look in the mirror and you're like, man, and you want to move away from that, right? And there's people like Caitlin that can help get you on the right path to where you want to be, right? Because you work with professionals, so a lot of what you do, it for sure helps on the personal side, but I guarantee that it does wonders on the professional side more than anything, right?
Yeah.
Like,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, because you don't know what can help unlock that next level for you. And it could be something that's, when you look in hindsight, can seem very simple, but it seemed like this huge mountain. I tell my wife sometimes that, so she makes mountains out of molehills, right? Because she looks at something and it's like so difficult. And I look at it and I'm coming from a different perspective. And it's like, oh, so just do this. And then she's like, oh, but she does the same thing to me where it's like, and she just gives me this different perspective. And having somebody on your side that can do that, that's essentially going to be unbiased, right? That makes a difference. So if you're like on the fence about wanting to try something, wanting to do something, uh, Caitlin, what's like the best way for somebody to reach out to you to find out a little bit more about you and your offerings?
Yeah. So you can check out my website at tendersproutcoaching.com. And then from there, you'll be able to find my contact. Or hello at tendersprout at gmail, or sorry, hello at tendersprout.com is helpful. Sorry, I was gonna give I was transitioning my professional and my personal email. But
It
yes, I'm
happens.
also on TikTok, on in Instagram at that's what Katie said, THTWHTKATIESAID. And at Caitlin Chalk. So that is how you can get in contact with me.
Okay. And for those of you watching, if you're wondering like what was all that, don't worry. It's going to be in the video description. You'll be able to get it. So I'll put the contact information there. And Caitlin, was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up the session today?
Just thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation. Just like you said, uh, the answers are within you, and just having the outside perspective to help you unravel that can be really helpful. So, yeah, external processing, very powerful.
Very much so. All right, guys. I want to thank y'all for joining us on another episode of the Sales Manager Academy podcast. I'm your host, Omar, and I want to thank our guest today, Caitlin, for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.